I'm 32 and work for a trucking company. This happened around the holidays when I was hauling a load 2 states away. The trip started like any other. I left town at 6 p.m., made good time, and by 11 p.m., I was ready for a quick stop. I pulled into a small, quiet truck stop. One of those places barely lit, where the silence feels off. My only plan: use the restroom, grab a coffee, and maybe rest my eyes for a few minutes. I went inside, did my thing, and came back out. But as I took a sip of my coffee, I noticed something. A man. He was standing at the back of the building, just outside the dimly lit area, leaning against the wall, watching. I couldn't see his eyes clearly, but I felt them on me. My truck was the only one parked on this side. There was nothing else to look at. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just waiting for someone. Maybe he wasn't even looking at me. But every time I glanced back, he was still there. A cold feeling crept up my spine. Something about this didn't feel right. The snow started falling harder. I put my coffee in the cup holder, started the truck, and pulled out of there. For the next half hour, I focused on the empty, snowy highway, trying to shake off the weird feeling. But then, a glint, a flash of light in my side mirror. I checked again. Nothing. Maybe it was a broken reflector on the road. Maybe my eyes were just playing tricks on me. But then after another hour of driving, there it was again. Only this time, I saw it. A car, right behind my trailer. So close that it was hidden in my blind spot. No headlights, no signals, just lurking in the darkness. If you were in my position, driving alone on an empty winter road with a car following you without headlights, what would you do? Would you speed up, pull over, or something else? Let me know in the comments. At first, I thought they just wanted to pass. But when I changed lanes, they followed. I switched lanes again. This time, they stayed put. Then, slowly, they disappeared into the night. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. A couple of hours later, I pulled off at a small rest stop. No buildings, no restrooms, just a cutaway from the road big enough for a few trucks. I shut off the engine, leaned my seat back, and closed my eyes. The snowfall outside was soft, almost peaceful. I fell asleep fast, but then I woke up. Something felt wrong. The truck was quiet. The world outside was silent. But my body, my instincts, they were screaming at me. I turned my head slightly, shifting in my seat, and that's when I saw them. A pair of huge, wide, unblinking eyes staring at me from outside my window. I jolted upright, my heart slamming against my ribs. The man did not move, not a flinch, not a twitch, just staring. Then he grabbed the door handle. Click, he pulled. Click, click, click. I scrambled to start the truck, but before I could, he turned and ran into the snow. Seconds later, a car engine roared to life. From behind my trailer, the same car I saw on the road earlier sped off into the night. Who was he? What was he planning? And why did he follow me all night through the snow? To this day, I still don't know. But I do know one thing. If I hadn't locked my doors that night, I might not be here to tell this story. I was 16 when I got my first job at a pizza place. After saving up for 6 months, I finally bought a cheap car. I hated not being able to drive myself before, but now I had the freedom and a new goal. I wanted to do deliveries instead of working inside the shop. It was a regular weeknight. I started my shift at 5 p.m., scheduled until 10:30. The first few hours were busy, but by 8 p.m. things slowed down. No orders, nothing. Then at 9 p.m., an online order popped up. Just 2 medium pizzas. Easy. I grabbed them and headed out. The roads were nearly empty, just a few cars here and there. But 5 minutes into my drive, I noticed something. A car pulled out from a side street and got right behind me. Weird, right? The roads were open. They could have easily passed me, but they didn't. For the next 5 minutes, they stayed right behind me. I wasn't too concerned at first. Maybe they were just heading the same way. But when I turned into the neighborhood and saw their headlights turn in a few seconds later, something felt off. What were the chances that the only other car on the road was going to the exact same neighborhood as me? I kept driving. The houses here were far apart, some right by the road, others down long, dark driveways. It was one of those eerie neighborhoods where the woods swallowed everything around you. Finally, I spotted the right address, a lonely mailbox at the edge of a narrow driveway. I turned in, checked my mirrors, and felt my chest loosen when the car behind me drove past. I shook my head. "You're just paranoid," I told myself. I reached the house, about 200 feet in, grabbed the pizzas and knocked on the door. The porch light was on, but the inside of the house, completely dark. No answer. I knocked again. 30 seconds passed. Then a faint light flickered behind the window. A few seconds later, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, early 30s, wearing a nightgown, looking exhausted. But something was off. I have these pizzas for this address." I read the address aloud. She frowned. I didn't order anything. Her voice was groggy, annoyed, like I'd just woken her up. That's when my stomach twisted. If she didn't order, who did? I apologized and turned away. As I walked back to my car, my mind was racing. Was it a prank? A mistake? Then I froze. A car was parked right behind mine. Same one. Headlights off. Engine still running. A cold wave crashed over me. They had been waiting, watching. My mind screamed at me to move, but my legs felt like lead. Now let me ask you this. What would you do? Seriously, pause for a second. If you were in my shoes, trapped at the end of a dark driveway, with an unknown car blocking you in, what would be your next move? Let me know in the comments, because what happened next still gives me nightmares. Beat for suspense. I forced myself to keep walking. If this was some weird misunderstanding, they'd say something, but they didn't. I got in my car, tossed the pizzas onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. They didn't move. The driveway was too narrow to go around them. I edged forward, turning my car toward the house to make a U-turn. Surely now, they'd realize I was trying to leave, but they didn't budge. For 30 long seconds, we just sat there. Me in my car, them in theirs. Then their car doors opened. 4 men stepped out, hoodies, hats pulled low. One of them had his hand tucked inside his hoodie, holding something, and then they ran toward me. My heart exploded in my chest. I slammed on the gas, trying to swerve around them. My tires skidded off the driveway. My car spun, and bam, I crashed into a tree. I wasn't stuck, not yet, but I didn't take any chances. I jumped out and ran. Behind me, I heard footsteps. One of them was chasing me. He shouted something to the others, but I didn't look back. I ran deep into the woods, heart pounding, lungs burning, until I couldn't hear them anymore. I hid in the darkness and called 911. By the time officers arrived, the men and both cars were gone. My car never recovered. To this day, I don't know who they were or what they wanted. But one thing's for sure. This was never about pizza. They had set a trap, and I barely escaped. So, what do you think they were planning? Let me know in the comments. And next time you go out for a late-night delivery, stay aware, because someone might be waiting for you. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. when I was driving back home from my friend's place. His house was in a really remote area, just miles of empty farmlands and long, lonely roads. I was exhausted. A part of me wanted to stay over, but I had work in the morning, so I had no choice but to push through. I played some music to keep myself awake, staring at the endless stretch of road ahead. About 20 minutes in, my headlights illuminated something up ahead, right in the middle of the road. I slammed my brakes. It was a suitcase, a full-sized, closed suitcase, standing upright in the middle of the road. I just sat there, staring at it. Maybe it had fallen from someone's truck and landed that way. That was the only explanation that made sense. I didn't feel like getting out, so I simply steered into the opposite lane and drove around it. But now, let me ask you something. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have stopped and opened the suitcase? Or would you have ignored it like I did? Drop your answer in the comments. I kept driving, pushing the weirdness of that moment out of my mind. But just 5 minutes later, something even stranger happened. Once again, my headlights caught something ahead. This time, a truck. It was parked right in the middle of the lane. No hazard lights, no blinkers, no movement. If I hadn't had my high beams on, I could have crashed straight into it. I pulled up behind it and honked a few times. Nothing. I peered inside through the back window. No one was in the driver's seat. No one was in the truck. It was just abandoned. A completely deserted truck sitting in the middle of a dark, empty road at 2 a.m. Yeah, I didn't like this. I slowly drove around it, my heart pounding. But this time, I was wide awake. Was this somehow connected to the suitcase? Or was it just a creepy coincidence? Before I could figure it out, I had to stop again. Because this time, there was a person standing in the middle of the road. He was waving his arms at me. The guy looked to be in his early 40s with messy hair, cuts and scrapes on his hands and arms. His clothes were dirty, torn in places. As I stopped the car, he smiled. "Hey, did you see a truck back there?" I hesitated. "Yeah. Think you could give me a ride back to it?" Now here's where my brain started putting the pieces together. If his truck ran out of gas, shouldn't he have asked me to take him to a gas station? Then, why was he asking me to drive him back to the truck? Before I could respond, he kept talking. Almost like he didn't want me to think too hard about it. I started coming up with an excuse to say no when I saw something hidden in the crops beside the road. It was the rear end of a car. It was deep in the field, barely visible. I could only see one of the taillights faintly reflecting my headlights. And in that moment, I just knew. Something was very, very wrong. I slowly rolled my window up. The moment the glass shut, the man's smile disappeared. His eyes widened. His expression twisted into something angry. Then he started yelling and banging on my window. I didn't wait. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped the hell out of there. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and called the cops. But when they got there, the truck was gone. But the car in the field, that was still there. And what they found inside was something straight out of a nightmare. That car belonged to someone else. And the driver? They were no longer alive. But it wasn't a crash. It was something much worse. It looked like they had picked up a hitchhiker. And unfortunately, that was the last thing they ever did. Was the suitcase a part of this trap? The truck? Maybe. But one thing was clear. That man was no stranded driver. And he was never caught. If you were in my place, would you have let him in your car? Or would you have driven away? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want more terrifying true stories, hit that subscribe button. You never know when you might be in a situation like this, and you'll want to know exactly what to do. Friendship has always been my greatest treasure. Ever since I met Jeremy in secondary school, our connection was instant, and even though life took us down different paths, we always stayed in touch. Jeremy worked as a food delivery guy, while I wasted my time in a gadget shop. We didn't see each other as much, but I still considered him my best friend. So when he called me one Thursday night, asking for a favor, I couldn't say no. "Hey Jeff, buddy, I need your help." Jeremy's voice had a hint of desperation. "My bike broke down, and I have a few deliveries left. If my boss finds out, I'm done." I knew his boss was a ruthless man. No tolerance for mistakes, no second chances. And Jeremy? He really needed this job, so without a second thought, I agreed. I picked him up near his house and we loaded the pizzas into my old car. The first few deliveries were quick and easy. The night was going well until we reached the last address. It's a bit far, but after this, beers are on me. Jeremy laughed. We drove to the outskirts of the city, stopping in front of a house that looked straight out of a horror movie. Dark, isolated, surrounded by trees. The only light flickered dimly on the porch. Jeremy grabbed the pizza and stepped out. "Wait here, I won't be long." But minutes passed, then more. He didn't return. A chill crept up my spine. Something felt off. The house of horrors. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. I knocked. No answer. "Jeremy?" I called. Silence. I pushed the door open. Inside, the air was thick with a foul, rancid smell. The walls were covered with bizarre photos and newspaper clippings. I stepped forward cautiously, my heart hammering in my chest. Then in the kitchen, I saw it. A pizza box, lying on the floor, one slice missing. And then I heard it. A noise. A low, unexplainable sound coming from the basement. I froze. At this point, if it were you, would you go down to check? Or would you run back to your car and call for help? Let me know in the comments before you continue, because what happens next will make you rethink your answer. With no time to waste, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and stepped towards the basement door. But before I could react, a shadow appeared behind me. A strong hand grabbed my face. Darkness. I woke up tied to a chair. My head throbbed. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood. Jeremy sat next to me, his face pale, his eyes filled with terror. And then I saw him, a large man, towering over us. His eyes gleamed with something inhuman. "Welcome to my home," he grinned, his voice cold. "It seems I have two special guests tonight." I struggled against the ropes, but they were too tight. "I suppose you're wondering why you're here." The man continued. "Simple. You're going to die." His words were casual, as if he were discussing the weather. But what he said next made my blood run cold. "I like to eat human flesh." I couldn't breathe. "And the best part? Watching their faces, just before they die." He turned to Jeremy first. "You were the original plan." Jeremy shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face. "No, please." But the man only smiled wider. Then, without hesitation, he pulled out a knife and I don't want to say what happened next. Jeremy's screams filled the basement. I tried to close my eyes, but I couldn't. I was forced to watch. The room reeked of blood. Jeremy's cries grew weaker until they stopped altogether. Then the man did something I will never forget. He ate him right in front of me. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, to stop it, but I was next. "You know," he mused, chewing. "I usually cook my meals, add a little seasoning, but there's something about raw flesh. It's so much more personal." He laughed. I struggled against my restraints, desperate, terrified. Then suddenly, I felt it. The ropes. They were loose. I moved slowly, carefully, freeing one hand. Then I saw it, a metal rod on the floor. I grabbed it. He was still busy with Jeremy. His back was turned. I stood up, my heart pounding. I swung the rod with all my strength, but he dodged. Instead, I hit Jeremy. His eyes opened. He was still alive. I froze. "Did you really think I didn't notice you getting free?" The man chuckled, stepping closer. Jeremy coughed, his voice weak. "Help me, please." I raised the rod again, but the man snatched it from my hands and swung it at me. Pain exploded in my skull. I collapsed. It was over, or so I thought. A loud crash. Jeremy, injured but still fighting, had broken free. He'd attacked him, the lunatic with his chair, just enough to distract him. I ran. I slammed. The basement door shut. I heard him pounding on it. I didn't look back. I got into my car, called the police, and waited. By the time they arrived, Jeremy was gone. The murderer? Vanished. Years later, they finally caught him. When I saw the news, I knew it was him. His name was Nathaniel Bar Jonah, a serial killer, a cannibal. Jeremy wasn't his only victim. He had many before him, and maybe many after. To this day, I can't eat pizza without remembering that night. I can't sleep without hearing Jeremy's screams. And every time I see a food delivery guy, I pray that he never meets a monster like Nathaniel. Because sometimes, the scariest thing isn't a ghost or a demon. It's another human being. What would you have done in my place? Would you have gone into the house or run for help? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more terrifying stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Have you ever worked with someone who just felt off? Maybe they laughed at the wrong moments, or their eyes lingered too long when they looked at you. What if I told you that sometimes those small, eerie feelings could be warnings about something much darker lurking beneath the surface? This is a true story. More than 20 years ago, I worked as a security guard at a block factory. The job was simple: routine patrols, checking cameras, making sure nothing unusual was happening. Most nights were dull, the kind that make your eyes heavy and your mind wander. But one night, something happened that would haunt me for decades. It was early 1999, and I was about to leave the job after saving enough to buy a car. That's when I met Chad, the man who was supposed to replace me. At first, he seemed normal, soft-spoken, polite, but there was something off about him. He laughed at the wrong moments. His voice shifted mid-sentence, and his presence made my skin crawl. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just socially awkward. But then, something happened that made me realize this wasn't just in my head. One night, Chad was paired with Anna, another guard around my age. She was always full of energy, always talking. But when she came back from patrol that night, she was quiet. Too quiet. Her face was pale. Her hands trembled slightly. I knew something was wrong. When Chad left for the bathroom, I asked her. Her answer sent chills down my spine. They had been walking through the brass mill, a part of the plant that shut down at 6 a.m. No workers, no lights, just shadows stretching through the silence. She had turned around on the landing of a staircase, and there he was, standing too close, staring, smiling. Then in a whisper, he said something that made her blood run cold. He mentioned her wedding ring, how it wouldn't last much longer. His breath was almost touching her skin. She felt trapped. That was the moment I knew. Chad wasn't just weird, he was dangerous. I made sure to keep him with me on every patrol after that, and that night passed without further incident. Or so I thought. The next night, Chad was gone. At first I felt relief. Maybe he had quit. Maybe my gut feeling had been wrong after all. But then, Anna showed me her phone. Her hands shook as she read the words out loud. Chad had been arrested for murdering his wife. Not only that, he had dismembered her, burned the remains. Her body parts were found in a pond just a mile from where we worked. Imagine that for a second. You work beside someone, talk to them, maybe even joke around. And then one day, you find out they are a monster. And now, I have a question for you. If you had a gut feeling that someone around you wasn't normal, would you trust it, or would you brush it off, thinking you were just being paranoid? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes paranoia is the only thing that keeps you alive. That night, the factory felt different. The shadows seemed darker. The corridors felt tighter, as if they were closing in. I kept thinking, how many nights had I stood next to him completely unaware? Had he been watching us instead of doing his job? Had he been planning something worse? Even years later, I can't shake the feeling. Sometimes, when I drive at night, I glance in my rearview mirror and see his eyes, just for a second, then they're gone. But the question lingers. How many people like Chad have we ignored? How many monsters are hiding in plain sight? I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not the type of person who likes to compare their past with others. We all have our own struggles, our own demons. But if I have to be truly honest, my story, it's darker than most. I grew up without a family. My parents died when I was young, and from that moment on, my life was nothing but a series of nightmares. Orphanages, foster homes. None of them gave me the love or care I needed. Instead, I was tossed around like an unwanted package. People assumed I was the problem, but that wasn't true. The truth, I just had really, really bad luck. Eventually, I ran away. Living on the streets was hell, but at least I was free. Or so I thought, because the streets have their own monsters. And one cold, desperate night, I came face to face with one, a predator disguised as a friendly man, a serial killer, disguised as a pizza delivery guy. It was one of those nights where hunger gnaws at your stomach like a wild animal. The cold seeped into my bones, and I sat in a dark alley, curled up in my worn-out coat, trying to make it to the morning. That's when I saw him, a man in a delivery uniform, holding a pizza box, walking straight toward me. "Hey, are you hungry?" he asked, smiling. The smell of warm cheese and bread made my stomach twist in hunger. I hesitated, but in the end I took the box. Maybe there were still good people in the world. Maybe tonight was my lucky night. But then he didn't leave. He just stood there, watching me. His smile, it didn't seem kind anymore. Something about his eyes made my skin crawl. "Go ahead," he said, his voice too eager. "Eat it, it's free." I forced a polite smile. I'll eat it later. I'm not really..." His face changed. The friendly smile twisted into frustration. "Eat it now." His voice wasn't friendly anymore. It was sharp, aggressive. My heart started pounding. Why did he care so much about me eating this pizza? And then he grabbed my arm. I said, "Eat the damn pizza," he hissed, his grip tightening. That's when I knew. I had to run. Without thinking, I punched him and bolted down the street. His footsteps thundered behind me, getting closer, faster. I turned a corner, spotted an abandoned building, and darted inside. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and rot. I sprinted into a small room and crouched behind an old desk, trying to control my breathing. And then I heard him enter. His footsteps were slow, calculated. "I know you're here," he whispered. I squeezed my eyes shut. My heart was beating so loud I was sure he could hear it. "What would you do if you were in my place? Run? Fight? Or try to reason with him? Tell me in the comments, because what happened next still haunts me." I stayed frozen, hoping he wouldn't find me. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Your feet are covered in dirt." I glanced down. Footprints. He was following my trail. The door creaked open slowly, and the dim moonlight revealed his silhouette, his eyes locked onto mine. I screamed. He lunged at me. I dodged, grabbing a rusted pipe from the floor. He charged again, and with every ounce of strength I had, I swung. The pipe cracked against his head. Blood splattered. He staggered back, groaning in pain. I didn't wait. I hit him again, harder. He fell, bleeding, still. For a moment I stood there, panting. Should I run, or should I finish this? But fear won. I fled. Out the window, down the fire escape, and into the freezing night. Days passed. I found shelter, a job, and a small sense of normalcy. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had escaped that nightmare. But then I saw his face on the news. Chester Turner, one of the most dangerous serial killers in history. And I had escaped him, or had I? Even now, when I close my eyes, I see his face. I hear his voice whispering in the dark. I should have stayed. I should have stopped him. How many others suffered because I ran? I tell myself it wasn't my fault. That I was just a kid. That no one should have to live through that kind of terror. But even now, when I eat pizza, I feel sick because I remember his voice telling me to eat, telling me it was free, telling me that I was his next meal. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have fought back, played along, or something else? Drop your answers in the comments, and let's see how many of you would survive. Until next time, stay safe. When I started making deliveries, my parents always warned me about how dangerous the streets could be. I knew they were thinking about robberies or accidents, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me that night. I had been delivering food for 5 hours straight. My legs were aching, and I was ready to call it a night. But just as I thought I was done, one last order came in. A triple hamburger with everything extra. Strange. Most people ordered tacos or fried chicken. The address took me to an old forgotten neighborhood. The streets were dimly lit, houses abandoned, and the silence was unsettling. As I pulled up to the house, an eerie feeling washed over me. It was a 2-story building with boarded-up windows from the inside. The front door had deep scratch marks, as if someone or something had been clawing at it. I knocked. After a moment, the door creaked open. A tall, thin man stood before me. His gray t-shirt was stained with something dark. His pants were too big for him, and his hair was a tangled mess. But it was his eyes that disturbed me the most. Wild, unfocused, as if he was looking at something beyond the visible. "You arrived," he said, his lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He handed me a crumpled bill in exchange for the food. Just as I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. "Wait a minute." His tone was lower now, almost a whisper. But what really made my skin crawl was that he said my name. I had never told him my name. I didn't respond. I just got on my bike and sped away. "Stop. Quick question for you. If you were in my situation, would you go back if your boss insisted? Let me know in the comments." My phone buzzed. It was my boss. He sounded uneasy. "The customer is complaining about his order. He's insisting that you return. Says something is wrong with the food." Everything in me screamed, "Don't go back." But my boss was firm, and I needed the job. So against my better judgment, I turned around. When I arrived, the air smelled strange, metallic, almost like blood. I knocked. No answer. Something told me to leave, but my curiosity got the best of me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Silence. Then, a faint murmur from the kitchen. As I crept closer, I saw him, sitting on the floor, surrounded by torn food wrappers, his mouth smeared with grease. But the most horrifying part? He wasn't eating the hamburger. He was chewing on the cardboard box, biting into it as if it were food. His eyes flicked up at me, wide and unblinking. "This was delicious," he muttered, "but I need more." My stomach twisted, but I told myself, "He's just strange, not dangerous." I was wrong. Before I could react, he lunged at me. I hit the wall hard, my head spinning. When I came to, my hands were tied with a thick cable. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I struggled to free myself. The man was too distracted, digging through the food remains, whispering to himself. I saw a sharp edge sticking out of the cable. Twisting my wrists, I worked to cut through the binding. My skin burned, but after what felt like an eternity, the cable snapped. I was free. I moved carefully, reaching for a knife on the counter. But as I stepped forward, crack, the floor creaked. His head snapped toward me. "What do you think you're doing?" he snarled. Before I could move, he was on me again. He knocked me to the ground, his hands clawing at my face. His breath was hot and foul. I shoved him back with all my strength. His head smacked against the corner of the table. He went still. This was my chance. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the door. Locked. Frantically, I searched for the keys. They had to be here. Then it hit me. The pockets. I reached into his pants, my hands shaking, and pulled out a key ring. But just as I turned to unlock the door, a hand clamped around my ankle. "Don't go," he hissed. His grip tightened. His eyes were wild with hunger. "I've decided what to do with you." He yanked me back. sending me crashing onto the floor. Pain shot through my ribs. Then he grabbed a chair, raising it above his head. I rolled out of the way just in time. The chair shattered against the ground where I had been lying. We fought. Punches, kicks, scratches. I knew he was trying to kill me, and I knew I had to stop him first. I spotted a broken wooden plank nearby. I grabbed it and swung with all my strength. Crack! He collapsed. His body twitched once, then went still, gasping for breath. I fumbled with the keys and yanked the door open. I didn't care if someone found his body. I just wanted to escape. I pedaled as fast as I could, my hands still shaking. When I was at a safe distance, I reported everything to my boss. The company was horrified, but when I went to the police, nothing happened. Turns out, the man's father was rich, connected. The case was buried. The house remained abandoned as if nothing had ever happened. No news reports, no investigation, like it never happened. But I remember. And at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear his whisper in my head. So what would you have done in my place? Fight or run? Let me know in the comments. Speaking totally seriously, when I was in university, I had a night job. Just a way to make some money and pay tuition. I was 19, just an ordinary girl, and working the night shift at McDonald's was supposed to be easy. But that job gave me one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences of my life. It all started on my very first night. A woman pulled up in her car, screaming like crazy, waving her hands, making weird faces. At first I thought she was arguing with someone in the back seat, probably scolding her kids. She ordered 3 Big Macs and 3 large Cokes, but when she pulled up to the window, she was alone. No kids, no one in the back seat. She was polite to me, even cheerful. Wished me a good night and then drove off like nothing had happened. But as soon as she left, I heard my coworkers laughing behind me. I turned to them, confused. "That was your first time with Crazy Gladys," one of them said. Apparently this woman showed up almost every night, ordering absurd amounts of food, screaming into the empty car, acting like she wasn't alone. Nobody knew her real name, so they called her Crazy Gladys. Some nights, she was the only customer. At first I tried to brush it off, but something about her just didn't sit right with me. Why would she do this every night? Who was she talking to? Was she really crazy? Or was something else going on? If you were in my place, working the night shift, and saw someone talking to an invisible person in their car every single night, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know your answer. A week passed and my curiosity got the best of me. I decided I needed to know the truth, so I came up with a plan. The next time she showed up, I was going to ask her directly, "Who are you talking to?" That Friday night, I heard her before I even saw her. Her screams were louder than ever, and through the speaker I could actually make out what she was saying. She was yelling at someone named Juan. I hesitated, my heart pounding. But I finally worked up the courage to ask, sorry, are you talking to me?" She froze. For a long second, there was nothing but static over the speaker. Then in a low, almost whispered voice, she said, "No, it's nothing." I gulped, but I pushed forward. "Is Juan going to order something too?" I asked, trying to sound casual. For a moment there was silence, then she let out a scream so loud, so guttural, so inhuman, that it made my ears ring. The sound blasted through the McDonald's microphone system. My coworkers stopped what they were doing. The restaurant fell silent. Her scream lasted for 30 seconds, longer than any scream I had ever heard. It felt wrong. And then, without another word, she sped off, disappearing into the night. But as she passed, I caught a glimpse of her face through the window. She wasn't just screaming, she was crying. That night, the entire drive-through microphone system malfunctioned. It never worked the same again. My coworkers told me That crazy Gladys had been coming to McDonald's like this for at least a year. But after that night, she never came back. I never found out who Juan was or why she was screaming. And honestly, I never worked in fast food again. Wherever she is now, I just hope she finally got the help she needed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced something like this? And don't forget to subscribe for more chilling stories. March 2020. The world was falling apart. The pandemic had shut everything down, but our little fast food joint, it never closed. While other restaurants locked their doors, we kept serving burgers and fries, working through the chaos. It was exhausting, but nothing compared to him. Our most disturbing regular customer, a man who didn't just order food, he brought a sense of dread with him. He wasn't your average customer, always on his bike, staring through the windows like a hungry predator, waiting for one of us to take his order. He was obsessed with conspiracy theories, constantly mumbling to himself, and insisted on being served by certain employees. His mood switching from disturbingly calm to outright rude in seconds. His order? A double cheeseburger and fries, but almost burnt. And if they weren't charred to his liking, he'd lose it. Customers avoided him, choosing to wait in their cars rather than be anywhere near him. But then, things got worse. The manager, fed up with his behavior, banned him from the day shift. That meant he was now our problem. And I worked the night shift. One night, around 9:30 p.m., I was wrapping up my work when I saw him again, his silhouette lurking in the dim light outside. As expected, he ordered his usual, but this time he had a new request. I want my fries served with a spoon, no tongs. That was weird, but whatever. I just wanted to get rid of him. My coworker Mark rolled his eyes but started preparing the fries. The manager, who didn't know his usual routine, used tongs instead of a spoon. That small mistake, it set him off. His face twisted in rage as he grabbed the bag and flung the food back inside the restaurant, sending fries and burgers flying everywhere. He screamed, demanding a refund, his voice shaking with anger. Then suddenly, he grabbed the manager's arm. Now let me ask you something. If you were in this situation, what would you do? Would you stand up to him, knowing how unpredictable he was? Or would you just give him his money and pray he leaves? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how you'd handle this nightmare. The plastic dividers were the only thing stopping him from pulling the manager out through the window. We all started yelling, calling for help, but he didn't care. Instead of leaving, he started muttering to himself, pacing outside like a maniac, throwing death stares at us through the glass. When the police finally arrived, he changed. Gone was the furious, unstable man. Now he was calm, polite even. He spoke with the officers as if he had done nothing wrong. If we didn't have security cameras, they might have believed him. But the footage didn't lie. He was arrested that night. And though we never saw him inside the restaurant again, he still passed by, watching, his dead eyes peering through the windows, as if he was waiting for something or someone. Some customers are just too scary. And even though time has passed, I still wonder what would have happened if those dividers weren't there that night. Or worse, what if one night he decides to come back? Have you ever felt someone watching you, following you, but when you turn around, there's no one there? At least, that's what you think. I never imagined that moving to a new country would lead to the most terrifying night of my life. But that's exactly what happened. I had just left Australia, escaping an abusive marriage that drained every ounce of happiness from me. Leaving my family behind was painful, but I had to start over. So I chose Los Angeles, the fitness capital of the world, to rebuild my life. At first, everything seemed perfect. I found a great apartment on Melrose Avenue, got a dream job as a head trainer at a 24-hour gym, and even met some amazing people. My life was finally getting back on track. Until that one night. That night I was working late because a coworker showed up late for their shift. By the time I left the gym, it was almost 2 a.m. The streets were mostly empty, and while the main road was well lit, my street was dark, lined with towering trees that cast long, eerie shadows. I walked quickly, my footsteps echoing in the silence, but suddenly I had this feeling. You know, that deep gut instinct screaming at you? The kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just paranoia. But then I saw him. At the bus stop ahead, a massive man stood motionless, easily 6 feet tall, at least 300 pounds. A true giant. I'm a personal trainer, used to all kinds of body types, but something about him, it wasn't right. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew he was dangerous. Now let me ask you something. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you run, walk past him confidently, or call someone for help? Let me know in the comments, because what happened next still haunts me to this day. I forced myself to keep walking. Stay calm, don't give him a reason to follow you. But the second I passed him, I heard it. Heavy footsteps. They started slow, but then they quickened. My heart pounded. I clenched my keys between my fingers like a makeshift weapon. My apartment was only a few hundred meters away, but it felt like miles. Then suddenly, bam! He grabbed me. I screamed, swinging my fist with the keys in my hand, slashing at his face. He barely flinched. Just then, headlights beamed through the darkness. A car screeched to a stop, honking loudly. The man hesitated, then ran. I was shaking, gasping for air as a voice called out from the car. "Are you okay? Get in. I'll take you home." Inside were 2 men. One of them claimed to recognize me from the gym and even showed me his membership card. But after what just happened, how could I trust anyone? I was trapped between 2 choices. Stay alone in the dark where danger lurked, or get into a stranger's car and hope they were truly there to help. I hesitated. Then, against every instinct screaming at me, I got in. The rest of the night is a blur of fear, relief, and exhaustion. But one thing became crystal clear. Never ignore your gut feeling, because that feeling, that deep, unsettling fear, it might just save your life. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have gotten in the car or risked staying alone? Tell me in the comments, because honestly, I still don't know if I made the right choice. If you love chilling real-life horror stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Stay safe and always trust your instincts.